We're now live.
Okay.
Hello and welcome to the Chess Pit, the live stream where two guys talk about the World Chess Championship. I'm John Mackenzie and I'm joined as always by my good friend Phil Makepeace.
Good evening.
How the hell are you doing?
Today was all right, wasn't it? I think we've got a good game to have a digest of because it was interesting. It fizzled, but it's interesting. I think we've got to know enough about the general sort of psychology of both players from the game, and clearly, even though it was a draw, there's bits and pieces that we can talk about because the point of these streams and these recaps that we're doing for the podcast, we want to make it as broad as possible and get as many people in so that there's not as much technical information. We're not going to be going through the game on these recaps. We're just going to be talking more broadly and having a game where there are little moments rather than massive fireworks, I think favors us. Certainly earlier on, as we get into these, I think we might be able to add some more detail. But yeah, I'm happy with today. I think it's a very interesting start.
Yeah, well, before we get into it too much, just to reiterate, as you've said, this isn't going to be a specialist feed. If we say anything that you don't understand or you want clarifying, then do get in touch in the comments. Get in touch with the comment in the comments anyway and say hello, because it would be lovely to hear from you. But we're just gonna we'll run through the first game of the World Chess Championship, which was today, and I think let's just kick off before we start, Phil, with just how you felt the game ebbed and flowed today. If you were to give a summary to someone who hadn't watched the game, how would you describe it?
So the opening was a surprise. Not the initial opening, the Ruy Lopez, E5 and the Berlin, not the Berlin, sorry, the A6 response, and just the sort of Marshall gambit that we got was, I think, fairly standard. However, Magnus uncorked this. It's not a novelty, but it's certainly not particularly well-trodden territory with 8 knight to A5, which allowed Nepomniachtchi to just hoover off his pawn on E5 anyway and create this position where Nepo had an extra pawn, but Magnus had 2 bishops and a bit of play, which is kind of the point of the Marshall anyway. But the speed at which both players were playing their moves in this previously untrodden on an elite level anyway game on these moves indicated that they were both unbelievably heavily prepped. Like, it wasn't a surprise to Nepo, clearly. He not necessarily expecting this, but that, he could just know exactly what he should be doing against knight A5. And that meant that, we got this. I mean, Anish Giri on the Chess24 commentary was really impressed with Nepo's prep and just saying, look, I think the move 14 King F1, like, well, that's something that he would have had a real job trying to find over the board. And the fact that he played it within 20 seconds obviously meant it was prepped. But equally, Magnus's prep was clearly very solid and very good. And the position he got was one where he was in control. Despite being this pawn down, he was definitely in control. And ended up just having a little bit of pressure in the middle game, which Nepo dealt with pretty well, I would suggest. At no point did he look under pressure. I was sort of trying to work out. I was looking at him, to be honest, more than the game, because it's his first ever game in the World Championship. Magnus just looked like Magnus. If he does, Magnus's faces, he's got so many different ones for different occasions, and he always looked a bit kind of just this is fine. He just looked a bit more chill. Whereas Nepo, if he was feeling it, wasn't necessarily showing it. I did read on Twitter earlier about the only non-Russian member of Nepo's team for this match is like a German sports psychologist who does things with Bayern. So I wonder if there's bits and pieces there that they've helped with, because it definitely on the board looked like Nepo was under the cosh a bit, but his face and general demeanor seemed pretty chill, which is good. It's a good sign. And maybe that's something he's been really working on, because I think from the candidates, if you remember, he was very expressive and maybe even betrayed when he thought he was doing well, which may not be the best idea generally. I don't know. But yeah, that's how the game went. And then it just fizzled into this repetition in the end and it was weird because I was doing a lesson just now where essentially at exactly the same moment as Nepo had this knight repetition to attack the rook, we were looking at my student's game where he had exactly the same thing. So it was one of those weird. I'm looking up, so I've got the Carlsen Nepo on this screen, and I've got my student here with looking through one of his games. I was getting confused which one was which, because they had exactly the same thing where you could just do this rook and knight repetition, which was quite cool. So I've had a really fun afternoon, actually, comparing, being able to drag the Carlsen Nepo game into my lesson.
Well, how would you describe that then as a on the scale of good to bad opening games of a World Chess Championship? Do you think it had everything that we wanted to see? I mean, it gives us a sense that the Nepo isn't going to be a rollover, I suppose. It gives us a sense that Magnus is looking for those endgame ideas throughout the game. It gives us a sense that there's going to be a lot of prep here. There's going to be some really interesting novelties as well. How do you feel about it as an example of an opening game for a World Chess Championship?
So I'll answer this in the context of our preview episode, where we talked a little bit about the time control and how that's different from the 2016 and 2018 matches. And we wondered whether Nepo or Magnus, indeed, though Magnus did have this time control in the 2013 and 2014 matches, wondered whether that would influence the play, because you get these moments leading up to move 40, leading up to move 60, where you might have a time scramble and where you might have this extra pressure because you don't have these 30 seconds being added each time. What we got was a game where, because the opening prep was so sharp, they were able to get to move 17, 18 very quickly. And so in the end, they both had, I think, between 5 and 10 minutes left at move 40 when they got the bonus hour. So in terms of what we learned about the game, about the match narrative from the game, I think we can say that they're both unbelievably well prepped. We can say that might have this might be a lasting thing, where these moments between move 35 and 40, where we might get some time pressure, will probably only happen in games where maybe one player out preps the other, and or in games where, I mean, the queens came off really early here. That does simplify things. That does mean that the candidate moves are more obvious. It means that there's less sort of dynamism in the position you're going to get. So I don't think we to that bit where we're getting these time pressure, we don't know that yet. So that's going to come. That will happen at some point for sure. I was slightly disappointed, not for our scheduling, because I think it was we at one point I was a bit worried that we wouldn't be able to do it at 6 p.m. We've done it a bit earlier than that, but slightly disappointed that it didn't get to that next step in the end game that they were playing, where we really saw how much Magnus wanted it. It looked like at one point that Magnus was just going to keep pressing. He might have been going until tomorrow morning. But yeah, as an opening game, I think Nepo will be satisfied with just how the day went in general and how he was able to deal with a surprise from Magnus. Magnus isn't just going to be uncorking knight a5 against anyone. That was a specific World Championship moment there. And it's probably up there with the big World Championship novelties we've had in the past, like Kramnik, rook takes b7 against Kasparov in 2000, Karpov's knight g5 against Korchnoi, I think in 1978, or maybe it was 81. But yeah, it's going to be up there in the kind of annals of World Championship novelties. But Nepo has dealt with it really well, and he's got this draw. Okay, he's inverted commas wasted a white. I'm not sure that's true. I think it's it is what it is. I think in terms of because we get this alternating white and black, I think you should ask me the same question tomorrow about what we know, because after one player's had one of each, I think we'll know so much more about their approach and about what we've got to come.
Yeah, well, to push you on that, just in terms of the white pieces, black pieces thing, it felt very much to me, as obviously a neophyte watching this game, that Magnus really controlled a lot of the way that the game went in the early stages. So he was the one who made the sort of novelty move as black in the opening, forced Nepo to sort of respond a little bit, and there was a point before it started looking drawish when I was watching the Peter's Fiddler feed with Vladimir Kramnik, and they were definitely talking about how they felt as though Nepo had been a little bit passive in his play. He sort of shuffled his pieces around a lot, whereas Magnus had moved his pieces into more dangerous position. Given that obviously Magnus is doing that with black and has managed to get a fairly easy-ish draw, it felt as though for a lot of the time he was sort of in control, even if it didn't maybe break the way that he wanted to break. What's it going to look like tomorrow when Magnus is playing with white? Will it be the case that he will just be able to control the position with white, and then we'll see a very different sort of side to Nepo's game that he'll have to bring out?
That's very possible, yeah. I think part of what happened today was that, Magnus essentially played a gambit, and that's what happens in a gambit. You sacrifice a pawn in exchange for better piece play. And in the end, Nepo had to play more cagily and more defensively simply to hold on to that pawn so that he didn't get completely overrun. Tomorrow, and Magnus's games with white in general, and Duncan, thank you to Duncan in the comments for asking whether that means that because he's got 7 white games left, does that give him this psychological advantage? I don't know. I'm not sure that's necessarily the case. Obviously, Magnus has survived in inverted commas of black, but he's also possibly missed an opportunity there to press a bit. I think inevitably it's going to depend on the opening choices tomorrow. If Nepo comes out fighting with a Sicilian or something, or Magnus could easily play 1c4 again. He's done that before. I don't think we'll really know. Again, I'm trying not to be too committal here, but equally I'm not. I think Magnus is definitely going to be very comfortable with where he's at because he's got the white tomorrow. But it's just, if Nepo can play something similar, there's absolutely no reason why he can't do the same thing. That's maybe what happens now, where a lot of this prep that they've done might just be really trying to make the most of their black games, as it were. Not necessarily trying to win, but just making these. I think most of the novelties you'll see in this event will come from black, which is, we've seen one already, and the ones I mentioned earlier in the previous World Championships were all for white. Maybe that's where the most of the edge is in competitive play at the elite level now, where black response is just taking it on as opposed to not.
Is that just then
what was
seen
the
as
actual,
a way
what was the actual question? Yeah.
Is that just a way then for black to sort of normalize the move order disadvantage then? Is that just the way it's going? You sort of, with white, you're going to play solid and do what you've got to do, whereas with black you've got to try and take your opponent out of their book and see where you end up.
That
basically
might be the way it goes. Yeah. We'll see what happens. I think, once we know what Nepo is responding to, I'm assuming Magnus is going to play e4. We'll know a bit more, but I think the psychology is something that we didn't necessarily touch. We touched on a bit in the preview, didn't we? But possibly not as much as we could have done, and that's something that is. I think, as Duncan suggests, I don't think there's a particular material advantage there because you're going to get 7 whites after game 1 anyway. psychological, Magnus has, I think, made more of an impression than Nepo, certainly. But equally, as I said, Nepo's got through game one. There's no blood. He's just in a good position still, and there's absolutely nothing to suggest that there's a clear discrepancy in their approach anyway so far. They're both clearly unbelievably well prepped.
Yeah. So let's just think about each of the individual players then as they're sort of reflecting on the game today. For Nepo, how do you think he'll be feeling after that game?
I think perfectly fine. I think there's I mean, what time is it? What time did it finish there? It finished at about 8 p.m. 8:30. That's plenty of time for him to do what he needs to tonight. To just because he'll have done all the work for game. Basically, we're in a position here where they'll have done the initial groundwork weeks and months ago for their first game with white, their first game with black. They'll be making the tweaks then ahead of game 3 and 4 for the next time they play a particular color, because this is the interesting thing about match play. We're going to get possibly the same opening line happening a lot, where we may now get Nepo not playing bishop a4 or not playing a particular move just to avoid this knight a5 thing, because it clearly works. We're going to get deviations and they're going to be building on what they've done already, but they can't do that yet before game 2 because this is going to be Nepo's first game with white. So I think tonight Nepo can sleep pretty easy. They'll just be going over his stuff with white, so with black, and I think he's feeling pretty good. Carlsen also, as I said, he's made the running so far, but he's come out of it with a draw. If anything, I think Magnus will be more satisfied with how the game went, but Nepo might be more satisfied with the actual result.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing you mention that sort of like first double game block where you're sort of starting with a clean slate. How will the scheduling look for them after that? Is it just then a case of constantly tweaking, as you've said, and how much should we expect to see similar openings being used in this match?
I think we're going to get a lot of this kind of your E4 E5s, unless there'll be a moment where someone uncorks something strange. I mean, Carlsen could easily drag out the Caro-Kann or something. Nepo's played the French a bit. We might get one of those at some point. I'd be surprised if, as has been happening a lot, everyone's on Twitter is going, play 1b3. Well, no, that's not going to happen. I suggest. It'll be interesting if Carlsen, if he goes one game ahead, will he start to play d4 or c4 to be a bit more solid with white? That's a possibility. But it's going to be how they use the rest days as well. We've got our first rest day on Monday, so they're going in tranche of 3, then 2, then 3, then 2, then 3, and then that takes us to game 13, and there'd be a rest day before a potential decider. So it's how they use the rest days as well. And they both looked pretty calm. They both looked pretty fresh. I think Carlsen was looking quite trim compared to what I've seen of him before. Nepo, I don't really understand Nepo's physiology. He just seems to do whatever he wants. I love the boy. So he rocked up today and just looking scowly. I think we're in a position where we know so much more this time tomorrow.
And then just one final question before we close things up for you. How much has today changed any of your sort of assessments of how the match would go before? We did a preview last week, obviously. Are you feeling as though any of your takes are under threat?
Yeah, so I predicted that Magnus would go a couple of games up early, but only if he was white in game 1. I think he's got a very good chance of making it count tomorrow or on game 4, which would be on Tuesday. I still think Magnus will win 1 early. I'm not going to change that opinion. It may not be tomorrow. It may be Tuesday. It may be Friday, which would be game 6. No, I haven't really changed anything. It hasn't really changed anything, but it's interesting that I think one thing that has changed is the time thing, where because I think we're gonna get a lot more prep than perhaps we thought. Maybe 3 or 4 moves more, which will affect, as I said, the later bit of the game, where instead of being under time pressure at like move 32, they're going to be at more like 37, 38, which is much easier to deal with if you're getting a bonus hour at move 40. So that's maybe the one thing from today that I would alter slightly. Just I think we're going to get fewer moments of around the time controls.
And we will be back doing a similar debrief after every game in this World Championship. Thank you for the people who said hello in the chat. That's Tord, Duncan, and Johnny Bryant. Great to hear from you all. I hope you're all as excited as we are about the match that is going to unfold. But I think we will leave it there. I think it's me and you again tomorrow, isn't it, Phil?
So it is, yep.
We'll be doing a similar sort of time, I guess, depending on, obviously, match dependent. But yeah, do get in touch if there's any questions that you have and that you want us to talk about during these sessions as well. Just get in touch through Twitter. You can find our Twitter handle at ChessPitPod, and that's probably the best place to go to get in touch with us. So thanks very much for tonight, Phil. Have a good evening.